Hello everyone. Welcome to another night here at the Fireside Tales. There's a lot of debate with history about what is real and what is not. For instance, the story of George Washington cutting down the cherry tree is widely regarded as fiction, while a story about Robin Hood may in fact be true. One story that there's a lot of speculation about is the story of John Henry Hammer. There's a lot of debate about whether John Henry was a real person and whether the events that transpired at Big Ben Tunnel actually happened. Well, my historians at the Fireside Tales have looked over this matter, and we have discovered that John Henry was indeed a real person, and that the story really did happen. And I thought I'd go ahead and tell you all this story tonight. It occurs in West Virginia. Now, it is said that when John Henry was born, there was a great storm, and the lightning flashed and the thunder rumbled, and it seemed that the earth trembled beneath everyone's feet. And John Henry grew up just like any other boy, except for the fact that he was extraordinarily strong. And indeed, there are many here at the Fireside Tales that speculate that he might have had giant blood in him. I wouldn't like to comment on this. I deal firmly with the truth, but I will admit that it is a possibility. Anyways, one day John Henry, when he was just a little boy, walked up to his father Hammer, and he picked it up, and he looked over at his father, and he said, "One day I'm going to be a steel-driving man." And it seemed that these words turned out to be true. When John Henry grew up, he was indeed a steel-driving man, and every day he went out and worked under the fierce sun, getting about 30 cents a day, laying track and drilling holes into the mountain for dynamite to be put in. And he became something of a legend down there in West Virginia. People would flock from miles around to see him move that hammer as fast as lightning, and it was said he was as strong as a mountain. Well, anyways, one day John Henry was working with his fellow workers, and a big truck pulled up, and there was a man in it, and the man was dressed in a white tuxedo, and he was smoking a big cigar. And the man came out and he said, "I'd like to speak to John Henry. John Henry Hammer." And John Henry walked up and he said, "What do you be wanting, sir?" And the man said, "John Henry Hammer, I'd like you to meet your replacement." And the man, he pulled back a cloth and revealed a big machine made out of steel and had a big pipe out one end of it. And the man said, "This here's a steam engine, and it can work twice as hard and twice as fast as any of your men here." And John Henry, he said, "Is that so? Tell me something, steam engine. Whose little mouse are you feeding? What little steam engines are you working for?" And, the steam engine didn't reply. Really? Well, tell me something. What are you planning on buying with your money? What clothes for the wife and children? The steam engine didn't reply. "No bread and butter?" said John Henry. The man in white listened to this, and the workers snickering, and the man said, "John Henry, this here's the future. And you can live in the past all you want, but you can't deny the inevitable. One day this is going to be in every country and every nation, and we ain't going to need you workers." And John Henry said, "Well, today ain't going to be that day. Metal ain't going to take the place of man. I'd like to challenge your steam engine to a race. And if you win, I'll put down my hammer for good. But if I win, these men get to keep working." And the man in white said, "Well, John Henry, I'm thinking you got yourself a deal." And the man, he lifted up his hand, because he realized that he better have the town's support, and if this story broke out and his steam engine proved itself, as he was sure it would, he would certainly, basically win the game, and his steam engine would take over the world, and so, John Henry, he lifted up his hand, and he shook the man in white's hand. Anyways, a couple days later, thousands of people came to watch this big event, with the steam engine and John Henry standing there. John Henry looked over at the steam engine, and the steam engine was being polished and shined. And John Henry, he said, "Well, steam engine, good race." The steam engine didn't reply. "I be thinking you didn't hear me, steam engine. I said good race." The steam engine didn't reply, and John Henry laughed, and he said, "Well, the day the machine takes the place of man is the day this world loses its heart. That a day that I don't want to be seen." So John Henry, he picked it up, whether that be the future or not. Well, anyways, a man came out, and he was carrying a gun. And John Henry stood there, and the man raised up his gun, and he fired out into the air. And John Henry and the engine began to race. John Henry brought his hammer down, and he moved as fast as lightning. But the steam engine moved faster down the tracks, chugging away. And John Henry became frantic, and his swings became wilder and wilder, and the steam engine kept moving. And finally, John Henry threw his hammer down once, and he fell down on the track and hit his chin on the steel. And he laid there, and he was sure he was going to fail. But then he looked over at his wife, Polly Ann, and his 7 children, and suddenly a bit of courage went through his heart. And John Henry stood up, and he began to hit his hammer again and again. Soon they came towards the mountain, and John Henry was catching up, and he began to hit his hammer against the mountain, digging deeper and deeper. And it was said as John Henry and that steam engine went into the mountain that their ringing and those hammers hitting could be heard for miles around. And John Henry continued to hit, and big clouds of dust rolled in, and the people all waited, and there seemed to be a silence that filled the whole area. And suddenly John Henry came out the other side of the mountain, hitting away, and the steam engine was coming up close behind him, but suddenly it began to chug, and it began to spurt, and all at once it exploded, and the parts, they flew all across the hillsides. And John Henry came towards the finish line, and he threw his hammer down, and he was sweating under the heat of the fierce sun, and he took his wife, and he hugged her, and he took his son, and he hugged her, and he said, "Let's go back home, Polly Ann." So the 2 of them walked home, and Polly Ann gave him some water and some food, and he ate and drank. And he was so tired that he just laid out on the bed. And as he laid there, he could hear some soft music, and he assumed that his children must be singing. And he looked out in the summer day, and he saw the fireflies flying around in the garden. And he closed his eyes. The next day, John Henry was dead, and he was buried under the sand, close to Big Ben Tunnel. It is said that every now and then a train goes by. Whenever it comes towards John Henry's grave, it gives a little whistle, and all the people on board take off their hats in respect, and, to quote a Johnny Cash song, say, "Yonder lies a steel-driving man. Yonder lies a steel-driving man."